whether that's you want to tell the story about the murder of your mother, or you want to give people homemaking tips to make their home a brighter place for their family and children. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what it is. If something is passionate and it resonates inside you, you have to get it out.
Podcasting is hard, so why not get a little coaching? Welcome to Podcast Coaching with Christine. I'm your host, Christine O'Donnell. I'm an Emmy-nominated TV journalist and podcast coach. Each week, I interview someone who has an exceptional story and talent to help independent podcasters grow their shows. Hello, and welcome back to this season of Podcast Coaching with Christine, a resource for growth, motivation, and community for podcasters. I'm your host, Christine O'Donnell. I'm an Emmy-nominated TV journalist, and I am also a podcast coach and the founder of Right-Sided Podcasting. In this season, I have been really focusing on the power that comes from using our voices and how to harness it. In the past 3 years, I've been working with podcasters, and I consistently find that there are sticking points that stop people from achieving their full potential when it comes to podcasting. And I feel like that can be so frustrating. I have felt that, and I still feel like I get stuck sometimes. So my goal is to help podcasters, including myself, get unstuck and stay motivated and keep on growing. So this episode is going to be actually a little bit different than some of the other things you've heard from me. And it actually, I feel like I'm like re-tapping into some of the stories that I used to cover as a journalist. Really excited for our guest. His name is Collier Landry, and he has been through an unimaginable situation and has used his voice to get through it. He is an LA-based filmmaker. He's a keynote speaker, TEDx, and host of the Moving Past Murder podcast. Collier, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Christine.
Thank you for being here. What did you think of my intro?
It was great.
Thank you.
Great. I love it. I tried not to look at you. I was like, I'm just going to focus over here and look weirdly off into the distance.
Thank you, you guys. I was getting like a little bit nervous. So I was like, don't look at me. All right. So we're going to keep going here. So Collier, and I mean, we're laughing right now, but I mean, I'm about to like talk about what you're most well known for. And this is his documentary. It's called A Murder in Mansfield, and it speaks specifically about a horrifying incident that happened in his life. When he was 11, he heard his father murder his mother and then had to testify in court against him.
That is correct.
Collier, you've been talking about this story, you said, for 30 plus years.
Yeah.
So
let's not say plus, so people think like 39, 38, 31 years. I don't want to age myself, or maybe okay. I do, because then they'll be like, oh, wow, he looks fantastic for his late 40s, but I'm not in my late 40s. I have been. So on December 31st, 1989, I woke up in the middle of the night, about 3:18 a.m., to the sound of two loud thuds. I heard 12 footsteps as they slowly walked down the hallway, and they stopped at my door, and something told me not to look up. The next morning, when I woke up, I immediately ran to my mother's room and discovered she was missing. Now, I knew in my heart that my mother was dead. Because my mother had never left me before. And we were very close. My parents were going through a very nasty divorce, and my father was a very violent guy. I went downstairs and confronted my father, and he said, well, Mommy took a little vacation, Collier. I, on the sly, contacted my mother's friends, and I said, look, Mommy's missing. She's not here, and something has happened to her. A missing persons case was filed, and police came to the house, and they basically treated it as a missing persons case. My father was a doctor, a physician in a very small town in Ohio. So they weren't really into investigating people of that sort of stature. I did, however, meet a police detective who picked up the case, and I convinced him, when no one else believed me, that she was dead. 25 days later, they dug up her body underneath the house that my father had purchased for his mistress in our neighboring state of Pennsylvania. and my mother was dead. I had witnessed a murder, essentially, and I testified before the grand jury. My father was then arraigned, and I testified at his months-long murder trial for 2.5 days, and I put my father in prison. Uh, I say that my father put himself in prison, but I was the only witness, and everything else was circumstantial, and that there was a very strong possibility that my father would have gotten off. Um, so I, my entire family abandoned me on both sides during this time. I went to the foster care system, and I basically knew that confronting my father in a courtroom, I knew that if this man didn't go to jail, as soon as he gets released, he's going to kill me. Um, but yeah, he was convicted of her murder, and he is still incarcerated to this day. So about 25, 26 years later, I go back to my small town in Ohio, and I revisit the the crime. I revisit the what I refer to as the ancillary victims. So for me, one of the things that I'm most passionate about in life and why I wanted to make the film, and I can talk about the whole genesis of that if you want, but in a nutshell, I always felt growing up that we as a society, the bad guy goes to jail, the victim is dead, right? The state gets his restitution, the gavel hits, and then we go next, and then we forget about it. We don't actually look at the consequences of violence, the impact these have on ancillary victims, on communities, secondary victims, non-combat PTSD.
When you say ancillary victims, what do you mean? Like, who do you mean?
So, an ancillary victim would be not okay. So the person who is murdered is killed; they're the victim, right? But this is like myself, my mother's best friends, my playmates, my childhood playmates. All these people that have been um, affected by the ripple of such a traumatic event, and we tend to kind of brush that aside. And I don't even know if we brush it aside because that would take a conscientious that would be a conscientious choice that we make. I think we subconsciously brush those things aside, and we don't engage in these dialogues. Now, we are now as a society starting to shift to where we do engage in these dialogues, and we have been for quite a while, but 30 years ago almost we did not. And I grew up in the shadow of that, and seeing how people were affected around me, um, and how I was affected myself, and I was like, I have to do something to tell my mother's story and to allow us to start to examine these types of things, and have these conversations. And that's why I made A Murder in Mansfield with Investigation Discovery.
So, I mean, uh, what you've been through, it's insane to me. And I talk to you, and I feel like it's so easy to laugh and smile and like just like quickly like deflect maybe. Like it's so easy. And I also don't know if that might be like a defense mechanism, right? Like f- I haven't been through what you've been through, but working as a journalist, I've seen a lot of like really awful stuff. Um,
Sure.
and I find that people who've seen a lot of awful stuff tend to use like dark humor to like cope with that. Do you feel like that is part of like a coping mechanism for you, or is it is for me. Like I can't help myself, I think sometimes.
So it's interesting you say that. So we have a mutual friend, Eric Swanson,
Yeah.
and he was talking to me yesterday because he was listening to my podcast, and he said, he's like, I think it's really
Mhm.
amazing what you're doing. And he's like, but I'm not saying because I think your story's amazing because your story's amazing, but not the murder. I'm like, I get it. But a lot of people approach it that they're almost like, yes, there is that dark humor element where they're like laughing at me and we're having these conversations, but then they go, oh, but this guy's been through this trauma.
Yeah.
But that's not how I look at it. You know what I mean? And a lot of people forget, and why wouldn't they? Because they really, in a lot of ways, can't understand because of what I have been through. The gravitas of what I've been through is so enormous that um they feel almost guilty for chuckling or laughing or assuming certain things. And I'm like, look, you're just a human being reacting to what I'm saying. For me, this is my reality, and I talk about it all the time. And now I'm talking about it even more than I have, since I've made the film. It's been my way of life. I've been talking about this for 30 years, and that was my
Yeah.
coping mechanism. I just want to talk to people. I A lot of people say, well, okay, well, so when you grew up, did you go through a lot of therapy? Yes, I went through therapy. But for me, every opportunity I got to talk to someone about my story, because everybody was interested in it, was a moment of therapy for me. I was able to tell, I was able to relate to them. And that's how I related to the world. And that is ultimately what helped get me to a place where of acceptance and dealing with it and understanding and feeling good about it. As good as anyone can feel about it. So for me, when somebody says, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't mean to make light of it," it's fine. You're not saying, "Oh, I'm glad your dad killed your mom." No, you're trying to go. I think
Mhm.
what you're doing, what you've been through, is amazing. And yes, I respect that. It goes without saying to me. Somebody doesn't need to apologize and be like, "Oh, I didn't mean it that way." I know you didn't mean it that way. I know you're not a bad person, you know. But for me, it's just how I relate to the world. That's the lens that I'm a cinematographer, so I'll use these sort of I'll use these references, but that's the lens that I view this world through.
Yeah. Do you so I feel like I mean, you're an extreme case, but I know that a lot of podcasters also have like this story that they want to share and this fear that of being vulnerable and talking, perhaps like maybe the thing that is like pushing them, like the thing that is giving them their purpose, the reason for sharing their story is like this deep, dark, awful thing that happened. So it's kind of I'm wondering a couple things. One, how do you do it? And two, every time someone introduces you, like when I introduced you to the show today, do you relive it for a second?
Sure, a little bit. Absolutely. I would say that I do. There is a little bit of that. I go through it and
Is
because
it a
it's my life, and I
pain? Is it a
probably
ping?
no, it's not a pain. It's because it's my reality.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? So it's so hard, it's so difficult to really translate into something that someone who has not been through it understands. And that's on the flip side how I feel that I can do something like moving past murder, because I can speak to other people who have dealt with these tremendous circumstances because I come with the street cred, right? I've been through it. I can understand. I can relate. And a lot of times, the people that I talk to, they'll be like, "Man, I thought my story was bad." That's a kind of a funny thing. They'll be like, "Man, I thought my story was bad, and then I saw your movie, and I was like, what the
Yeah.
bleep?"
Yeah.
You know? And I'm like, "Yeah, it's and that's my cross to bear, but I don't ever look at it as a cross to bear. That's my gift to the world is really what it is. That I have been able to I mean, I've been and I say this and some people like you know, girls I've dated, so I've made these comments and they go, "Well, that kind of sounds meh, meh, meh." But I say I am the most fortunate person I know because I really am in the ways that I have found a way to cope with and deal with what I've been through, and then been able to take my story and been able to share it with other people and share my vulnerability authentically and help heal people. I don't know what's better than that. And when I set out to make the film A Murder in Mansfield, I wanted to change my life and one other life. That was it. If somebody could resonate with it and maybe it gave somebody who was considering doing something horrific like this and it gives them pause to maybe not do that, or some kid who was just like me, 12 years old, scared out of his mind, no family to back him up in a foster care situation that is horrific, dealing with this horrific scenario that you're in front of and nobody's got your back, and that kid watches this or hears my story and goes, okay, if Collier got through it, I can get through it. If I can give hope to somebody like that, I've done my job. That's it. I'm good. That's my legacy. That's my legacy. That's me continuing on from my mother's legacy, so she wouldn't die in vain. And that is why I came out to Los Angeles and wanted to be not necessarily a filmmaker. I moved out here. I went to school for music, and I wanted to be a musician, but I also wanted to tell the story, and I wanted to work in the film business in some capacity to tell that story. And I was really fortunate for that to happen. And it's just a gift that I'm able to give the world. And so I don't look at it as a burden. I don't look at it as anything else other than I am able to relate to people and to be able to help people as much as I can. And help them find solace, that they're not alone, that people go through it. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, you're sharing something with me that I feel like I've learned over, like, I mean, the past, several years working with podcasters, but also in the a decade plus before that, I was working as a journalist. It's not the case for everyone. I found that sometimes I would interview someone on the very worst day of their life, like the worst of the worst thing could have possibly happened. I covered Sandy Hook. I covered the Boston Marathon bombings. I've covered some really just dark, awful things. And and when I'm talking to people on this awful day, um, some people, even if it's so raw and they're still in shock, it almost is a coping mechanism for them to share it. And I don't know if it always stays that way for everyone. And I'm not saying this is the case for everyone, but with some days I would interview someone and afterwards, well, I mean, gosh, especially in my early days, I would literally just bawl through the interview, probably most likely with the person I was talking with. But afterwards, we would hug like we shared something together. And sometimes when you're talking to a camera lens or you're speaking into a microphone, it's almost like you can speak past time and space and reality to like people maybe that have passed on, and that maybe that sounds weird to say out loud, but I don't know. Sometimes I interview someone or in the past and it's felt like they felt like they had this opportunity to speak to the great beyond. And I think that that has been like it's been a coping mechanism. It's helped in some ways to share the story, to empathize with someone else, whether it's me or just one other person, and sometimes sharing that story might make a real difference in someone's life, whether gosh, I mean, there's so many stories I could pick. I just I don't want to. Think I've also
Sure.
blocked some of them out. But yeah, so you saying that it's been a little bit of a healing for you to continue to share your story again and again and again. Um, I've heard that also from some other podcasters. Like some people have had dark like depression and trauma, and for them stepping in front of the microphone each week has been a way to keep them alive, like keep them accountable to other people. Um so I think it's interesting the power of creating something, putting it out into the world, whether people listen to it or not. It's like you're still packaging something, putting it out into the world and getting rid of it. Maybe it's like you're decluttering yourself, or I don't know.
Sure. I mean, I mean, I don't know anyone. I mean, look, I'm an artist at my core.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know anyone who is a true artist who hasn't dealt with any sort of level of pain. There's nobody I really know, or anybody that's really been a real, what I would say, a real respectable artist in my opinion, that hasn't dealt with some level, that hasn't come through some sort of massive journey and come out the other side, and it's just really enhanced who they are and who they be. For example, like you see even people that do, let's just take the music industry for example. You have people who come through maybe even normal circumstances. Maybe they were born with a silver spoon in their mouth or whatever, and they went to, a great university. Everything was paid for. Life was wonderful. They grew up in the Hamptons, yada yada, right? But they really want to be an artist, so then they decide to kind of spiral into a sort of dark depression of drug addiction, or they decide to be homeless or whatever, and they sort of go into these places, and you're like, why did they do that? Well, it's maybe because they had to see what the darkness was before they could see the light, right? So, or the chiaroscuro, as I would say in my DP-ness. Uh, but I think that when you come through something like that, you want to let everyone know, and you sharing that journey, and that just enhances who you are, and it really enhances that authenticity, because I feel that this medium especially is all about authenticity, right? And there were moments when we were making the film that I stopped and said, okay, I'll just give you an example, and spoiler alert, but please go watch the film A Murder in Mansfield. It's on Investigation Discovery. It's now on Discovery Plus, Amazon, Hulu. Uh, but there's a scene in the movie when I'm interviewing the detective at his home and talking to him, and this is the detective that believed me, and we bonded, and his family was looking to adopt me and all of these things, and that didn't end so well. I was adopted into another family, which was wonderful, but it was a different scenario. That said, we were sitting in the room, and the director of the film, Barbara Koppel, has won 2 Academy Awards for documentaries. She's very talented. She's done documentaries on just about everyone. And I said, well, what do you guys, I was going to go to the gym, right? We're done with the interview. And I said, what are you guys going to go do? They're like, well, we're going to go look at the case file. And I was like, oh. And then Barbara is very good at getting people to do what she wants them to do. She's a filmmaker. And she said, would you want to come look at it, Collier? And David Messmore and his wife were like, absolutely not, because it has photos of my mother's body. And I stopped everyone. I said, no. I said, guys, this is what we're doing. This is what this is about. This is about going into the trenches. This is about exploring the depths of trauma, the effects, and coming out the other side. This is about being as authentic as possible. I was like, no, I need to. I was like, because by the way, I've imagined those photos my entire life. Just because I haven't seen them doesn't mean I don't have some sort of picture in my mind of what my mother's body looked like. And in the film, I look at the case file and I see these photos, and it's tremendously painful, and it's a very, it's a heavy scene for sure. But it's that moment, it's those moments that you can just be so vulnerable in front of a camera to show the audience that you too can get through this. And that's what's really cool.
I have seen that scene. So, um, do you remember your last moment with your mom?
I do. Um, I do. I remember it was like 8:30 at night, and I had gone to bed. I was sitting in the living room, and she was like, "Okay, you got to go to bed." And I gave her a kiss kiss, and I said, "Good night, mommy," and went up to bed. You know, she was wearing her pajamas. I had one. I think I used to wear like this at the time, like this long, like giant T-shirt that was like a, a sleep shirt. It like went down to like my knees or something. And I think it was like a Mickey Mouse Christmas shirt or something. And yeah, I do. And I remember a lot about her. I remember the summer after it happened, and like I said, I was in the foster care system, and I believe this was right after the trial and after my father was convicted. And w- my foster parents wanted to take, they had a kid, and then my adopted sister was with them, and they wanted custody of her, so they took us all to Chautauqua, New York. And kind of like they went off and did things as a family, and I was just kind of left on my own to just figure it out, which was crazy. But I remember I was in downtown Chautauqua, and I was walking around, and I remember, or maybe I even had a bike. No, I was just walking. And I enjoyed these moments by myself because it always made me think of my mother. But I remember I smelled her perfume, which was Chanel number 5. And I like looked around, And I started like, and I saw this woman, and my mother always wore her hair in a ponytail. She had blonde hair, crystal blue eyes like myself. And I remember seeing this woman. I started chasing after her, and then she disappeared. And then I looked, and then she was over there. You know, it's like I was in a Chris Nolan movie, right? And uh, I follow a little bit more, and then okay, she's gone again. I was like, oh man. But I kept smelling my mother's perfume, which smells like ylang ylang. I think it's what they make Chanel number 5 out of. But I would have these moments that would sort of carry me along throughout my life that would remind me of those final moments that I have with her, but they were like a little bit of flashback snippets, but they were in my reality. If this might make no sense to anyone, but it makes total sense to me. But you have these moments where you experience that, and you're going through maybe these dark moments in your life, or you're sort of contemplating, okay, what am I doing with my life, or what do I want to do? And smell these smells, or I'll think of her, or I'll remember her voice. And yeah, I do. So to answer your question, I do remember those things.
Um,
And now I feel bad because I made you tear up and cry. I'm sorry.
I've got a 3-year-old son and a
Yeah, I know.
7-month-old baby, and I'm
Mm,
still nursing. I'm just
mm.
and Collier, like, it's a lot.
Yeah, I know.
So, don't don't you shouldn't feel bad. Um, I, uh, I just, I was worried about this. Um, so I think the takeaway here is that for you, consistently sharing your story has been helpful to you. And maybe even at times, does it make you still feel close to her?
Absolutely. And it's very cathartic.
Yeah.
And, there's a moment in the film when I go and I'm with my mother's best friend, and I'm like going through like a school book diary type thing, and my mother had written in it. And then I'm like, my name is Collier Landry Boyle, and I am in the 4th grade. And when I grow up, I want to be a lawyer. And I just bust out laughing in the middle of the movie. I'm like, well, that didn't end very well. Like, that didn't work out so well. Okay, my mother always wanted me to be a lawyer, but I remember she had this plan for me. And I had just started taking piano lessons right before she was murdered. And unfortunately, after she was murdered, there was like only one person that taught piano in town, and I was like completely isolated from everyone. So I never got to take piano lessons. And then it just didn't happen. So I couldn't continue my piano lessons, right? But she was like, okay, so we were at Nordstrom's. My mother loved shopping, and we were at Nordstrom's, and she kept saying, okay, so Collier, you're going to take piano lessons, and you can play piano like the guy in Nordstrom's that wears the tuxedo, because you can do that for your summer job when you're at law school. And I'm thinking to myself, oh, okay, mommy, because she wants me to make a good living, and what mother doesn't want the best for their son? And of course, okay, you can be a lawyer, and and I probably would have been a really great lawyer. Um, but I have no desire for anything that represents any sort of real job in society. I'm an artist, and my mother was very encouraging of my artistic side, but also, she went to Penn. My father went to Penn. Education was a big deal in my household, and I was the kid that oh, it's summer vacation. Okay, great. You can have fun with your friends for like a week, and then you're going to go into summer school, and you're going to take science classes and art classes and reading classes. And I loved it. I love education. I am a voracious reader, listener, d- rabbit hole diver of any and all things. Like, even with podcasting, I've just started, and it's like I've just dipped down the rabbit hole of, okay, what do I need to get? What do I do? What are the metrics? What do I need? Like, it's a whole thing. And I'm like a sponge with the things that I absorb. Um, and that all stemmed from my mother. And that artistic side that she promoted is just kind of what I ended up doing. But at the end of the day, because she helped me develop that, or was encouraging of that, that is what has led me to be able to tell her story, what I think is in a really fantastic way, and to get her message out there. And so she didn't live in vain or die in vain, right? And there's nothing better, I think, than my mother would feel right now than me sharing her story and my experiences, and using those experiences to help others. Because I was telling somebody earlier today, I was saying I was on like a clubhouse thing and where they was talking about like not female empowerment, but like men who find strength in strong women is what the topic of conversation was. And I said, my mother was a very strong woman and placed a very high value on education. But you know, through that strength that I learned from her is how I was able to really come out the other side. And the things that I learned from her before she was taken from us is what ultimately allowed me to the next morning waking up and going, okay, what is my what now? What's next? How am I going to find out? How am I going to put this SOB in prison?
Is
And
that
that's when it
really what
started.
you thought at 11 though? Like
100%. 100%. I was on a mission
you d-
immediately.
you
And as
didn't
we're
oh go ahead.
no, go no, I'm sorry.
I just am wondering, I mean, at 11 though, don't you still love your dad? Like don't you still like didn't you have some loyalty? Was there some conflict? Like how were you able I mean, I'm just trying to figure out like at 11.
Well, my father is a sociopath and a psychopath, and he's very manipulative and he's a narcissist, and all those things go hand in hand.
Yes.
Uh, and he's very manipulative. And but at the same time, he was, I had met his girlfriend. I knew that he was cheating on my mother, and my father had rampant affairs on my mother for decades. And I had no idea of this. I was a kid, right? So I didn't know their history, but it was really until he introduced me to his mistress um, that it became an issue for my mother. Because I guess my mother's arrangement with him was like, look, do whatever you want, Jack. You involve our kid, it's done. And he did. And that's when she filed for divorce and whatnot. So I was already in a position that he was already not a nice person to me to begin with in a lot of ways. Now I had bonding moments with my father, but I do say on the witness stand that people are like, "Oh, that's exaggeratory," but it wasn't hyperbole. Um, I spent like 99% of my time with my mom and like 1% with my father. My father wasn't around. He was a workaholic. He was a doctor. And my times with my father were going to the hospital with him on his rounds, which was a very positive thing for me because I did get to see, you know, and help. Like I would go and I was into tap dancing and music when I was a kid. So I would like tap dance and sing for the patients and play harmonica and do all this stuff. But I got to see some sides of people and some sides of compassion from my father because my father, despite his nature, was a very good doctor, which was a massive issue in the community because he had all these patients. Somebody said to me, he when my father was arrested, they had estimated that over his 4 years of his private practice in Mansfield, Ohio, he had seen something like 80,000 patients. That's a lot of people. I'm always wondering, like, did my father like never sleep? um, because he had all these affairs, then he had all these, and he saw these patients. My father's patients loved him because he was a really good doctor. He really was a great doctor, very intelligent, very good, and he had this compassion for people in that way, which is so weird. And one of the things the prosecutor said, I think, in his closing argument, is he said, he was a healer by day and a killer by night. It's very true. But my relationship with my father was very fractured. He was a very violent man and had a rage inside him, and his temper was terrifying. And when I woke up and I said, I came downstairs and I said, "Where's my mother?" And he goes, "Well, mommy took a little vacation, Collier." I knew. I knew right then and there. I knew before that because I ran into my mother's room the next morning looking for blood on the sheets. I was tearing the bed apart looking for blood in the sheets, and I didn't find any. Um, because I knew something happened to her. I knew she was dead. And, that's a scary feeling to have. And I was terrified of my father. And so for me to even be running around, because I would go to school because this was obviously during a holiday, but then a couple of days later we go back to school. But I would tell my principal, I would say, please call Lieutenant Messmore at the police station, have him come down. I want to talk to him. And I'd be like, okay, so today when I go home, I'm going to distract my grandmother downstairs, who was my father's mother, who had come to stay with us when my mother, right before my mother disappeared. And she was really close with my mother too. She was like my mother's mother, because my mother didn't really have a very good relationship with her real mother, and her mother had passed by that time, anyways. But they were very close. But I would literally like run upstairs, like distract her, run upstairs, and we had these bookcases, and they were like in crawl spaces, and and I grew up in the Midwest, so in houses in the Midwest have these things, and you pull out, and there's a crawl space, and you pull the shelf out. I was looking for her body. I would literally like say to Dave Messmer, okay, when I go home, I'm going to pull the bookshelf out in this one room, and I'm going to see if I can find her body, or I can see if I can find her purse, because I know that she wouldn't leave the house without this one blue Dooney and Burke purse. And if I can found that, and of course I found it, and I told him. And what it really wasn't until, and I was telling this when I was on Dr. Phil, I have an episode of Dr. Phil that I do, and he says, well, you were the one that found the house. And I said, yeah. I said, my father went in, I was in his truck. He went into a gas station to pay for gas. And when he went in, and I could see him through the windshield, and I went through his truck, and I found these two Polaroids in the truck. And one was of of his girlfriend and her two kids, and they were sitting in front of a fireplace that was wrapped in plastics. It was brand new. And then the other was of a house. And I literally found those pictures, and I told Dave Messmore the next day, I said, I found these pictures of Sherry and her kids in the house, and this house. And I don't know where it is, but it's in his truck. And that was when they started looking into a house in another state. And that's when they found the house. And that's where they ultimately found my mother's body. That
So
was a roundabout way of answering what my relationship was like with my father, but that was what my relationship was like with my father.
so the when you had to go and talk on the stand in front of everyone, including your father, how did you like how were you able to do that at 11?
Well,
Were you
I
just so
remember.
angry?
Well, the thing is that okay. So how it was pitched to me was, we don't need you to testify, Collier. And you know the expression, "Come hell or high water."
Mhm.
Come hell or high water, I wasn't going to testify against him. I was like, I was like, no, 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 I'm testifying. Because everybody, I was talking to a woman a couple of months ago, and her sister and a friend, their lives were taken in a very public international case involving a very famous athlete and celebrity in the early to mid 90s. And the first thing that and it took place here in Los Angeles, and the first thing she said to me is, she was like, I can't believe that they made you testify, because she did her best and protected her sister's children and children of this gentleman who was on trial, from testifying against their father, or testifying on behalf of their father, whatever, being involved in the criminal process. And she said, I can't believe they did it. I said, no, no, no. I said, don't mistake this. I wanted to testify. In fact, they would have, there was no way they were not going to let me testify. And I sat there and I stared my father down in court, and he wouldn't look at me. And I remember, and I had never seen the trial footage until I went to the screening of the film in New York City when we premiered at Doc NYC Fest. And there's this shot of me in slow motion, like walking past my father as I leave the courtroom on my last day of testifying. But I was watching it, and I was like, man, I just wish I had just kind of gone like this, and then like just stared him down. I was like, as like Kobe Bryant would do after he dunked on somebody, and just looked at them like, yeah, that's right. But no, all jokes aside, yeah, no, it was not. There was no way I wasn't going to testify against him, because at the end of the day, I knew the truth and I told the truth, and the truth is the easiest thing for anyone to remember. And his lawyers tried to trip me up, and I was like a broken record, because I was telling the truth. So every time I would say something, I'd be like, nope, this is what happened. Nope, this is what happened. Nope, this is what happened. I was consistent. And it was to the point where people, and he filed a lawsuit afterwards and said, oh, I was coached by the prosecution and they told me what to say. And it was like, no, I knew what happened and I spoke the truth. That's it. Sorry, you just got caught. You just underestimated me. And one of the things we talk about in the film is My father was arrested on January 25th, 1990 in the morning. I was taken from the home at 6 a.m. on January 24th. My mother's body was found in the Erie, Pennsylvania home the early morning hours of January 25th. So about 3 or 4 days prior to me being removed from the home, my father said to me, and I had been talking to the police and all this stuff, and I'd just been doing everything behind his back, and I was terrified, of my father. But I was like, this is it. Like, this is the only chance because he's going to get away with this if I don't do something. It's only me, And thank God Dave Messmore believed me. And my father said, "Oh, Collier, I have this medical conference that is down in Florida." And my father would go to medical conferences in Florida, so this wasn't totally uh, off the wall. But he's like, "So, you'll come down with me, and we'll go to a medical conference." And I went to Dave Messmore, and I was like, "He wants to take me to Florida, and I am a really good swimmer, but I guarantee you, I am going to drown in the Gulf of Mexico." And he was like, "Yeah." And that's when he filed with Children's Services and said, "We got to get this kid out now." And they did.
Yeah.
Because my father, I think at that point had realized that the writing was on the wall, that I knew way too much. And like he had marks on his hands. He had me rub Ben Gay on his back because his shoulders were sore. Because he was jackhammering and making a grave for his, wife in the basement of this home that he purchased for his mistress. So, you know, um, I knew what was going on. And yeah, so that almost happened. That almost happened. So, and I was terrified. I said, Dave, I said, I'm gonna have a terrible accident. I'm gonna drown. Something's gonna happen. You know, food poisoning, whatever. I'm not coming back from Florida, just so you know. And those are sobering things to say as a child, but I was so locked in. When you hear about these stories and you watch people, like I was making a basketball reference because I love basketball, but like, you watch Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant, or you watch, very famous athletes that just seem to lock in, and they're just like, there's nothing that will distract them. That's how locked in I was. So I was like, okay, here's the reality of my situation. My father is violent. He could easily kill me. He's twice my size and 3 times my weight. Um, he, my mother is most certainly dead, and nobody believes me except for one guy, and nobody knows what to do, and I'm stuck. I got to just go as hard as I can to just do everything in my power to make sure this happens, that he is brought to justice, and that's what I did. And at the end of the day, and look, it doesn't escape me that I'm saying all this about my own father with regard to the murder of my mother by him. So it's not lost on me, the sort of gravity of the situation, but at the same time, I was on a mission. And that's it.
I think the thing that like gets me, like catches me up as you're talking, and I'm just like thinking about your experience, is just how much your mom probably just wanted to hold you during that whole time.
Sure, of course, and how much I would have wanted to have been held by her too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I almost broke there. Get a little misty. Yeah, that's for sure. I had, there was a lot of. I mean, I'm telling it as if it's, but it really is the hero's journey.
Yeah.
It's Joseph Campbell. It's, yeah, there is the breakdown, and there I went through that plenty in my life, and I went through that plenty in those moments. I mean, I was in a foster care situation where I was alone,
Yeah.
and it was just me, and I was like, you got to do this, dude. This is it. You got to do this. This is for all the marbles, as my mother used to say. This is the brass ring. You get one shot to grab the brass ring. She was really big into carousel horses. So she's like, you grab the brass ring. And I've always said that in my life, like for many opportunities. I'm like, this is the brass ring. It's even the scenario in the film when I confront my father. And one of the interesting things is when people watch the film, they don't know the whole backstory. And in my podcast, I'm going to get into episodes where I do discuss the backstory of this film. because
Yeah, you've mentioned your letters.
yeah, well, the letters, but the making of the film to me is way more interesting than the film because of all the roadblocks and all the things that almost happened. But my it was a very long it's a very long process, first of all, just to speak on the film industry in general, to make a project that one creates and to get it anywhere near completion or let alone sold and on television is like getting a winning lotto ticket. And it's so difficult to do it. It just this industry is just it's insane. It's like finding a needle in a field of haystacks. Um, so you already have that. But my father, when you see the scene when my father comes into the room and I'm confronting him, about ready to confront him, he comes in, he has this, he's like upbeat and he's like, hey, hey, Bumper. My father called me Bumper as a kid because I grew up on a naval base for the first 5 years of my life. And I used to point at the jets, the nose cones of the jets, and say, Bumper, Bumper. So that's how I got the nickname Bumper. So both my parents called me that. Um, but he comes in the room and he's got this sort of like, yeah, okay, yeah. And the reason he's like that is my father, and this is just the the core of sociopathy and narcissism. My father thought that I was making a film to help him get out of prison. And I pull a letter out and I read him this letter, and you can just see all the air get and feel all the air get sucked out of the room because that's really what happened. I literally am so shocked that they allowed us to continue the film because they thought that I was going to make a film about this big come to Jesus moment with my father, which it could have been if my father would have admitted his guilt. But but as I say in my TED talk, layered beyond, underneath the layers of narcissism and self protection, he just couldn't admit anything. It's crazy. It's something to see for sure.
Um, Collier, what would you say to a podcaster who also has something to say, but may be too afraid to share it?
Um, it might sound cliche, but just do it. You have to get it out there. There's something to be said about when you're an artist, right? And because that's what I consider myself, an artist. And we say this amongst ourselves. We don't we don't choose this line of work, and it's not like the line of work chooses us. We do this because we cannot. There's no choice. We cannot do anything else because that burning desire to tell that story or to share that which you hold with such conviction overwhelms any desire for comfort, creature comforts, any sense of normalcy that anyone looks at you as. You just have to literally take what you have that you want to give the world and just find it in you to put it out there. You just go inside, go within and say, this is the story I want to tell. This is who I want to be. This is my authentic self. Whether that's you want to tell the story about the murder of your mother, or you want to give people homemaking tips to make their home a brighter place for their family and children. You know what I mean? It doesn't matter what it is. If something is passionate and it resonates inside you, you have to get it out. Whatever your chosen medium is, if it's podcasting, if it's video, if it's photography, if it's art, sculpture, blah, blah, blah. If it's standing on a street corner on a soapbox with a megaphone and saying, this is what I feel, this is what it is, you got to get it out there. People might look at you like you're crazy. They certainly did to me. But at the end of the day, the reward that you get from doing something that is so authentic and true to yourself is nothing that can be measured by dollars and cents.
The reward you give yourself. Is that
Yeah.
what you said? The reward you give
Well, the reward,
yourself.
and then the reward that you get from doing something like this is it's unexplainable. It's you can't put a price on it. To be able to give something of yourself so purely.
That was incredible advice. And I just want to pull out that not only are you giving something to the world, but you are also doing something for yourself. I mean, we've
Absolutely.
talked about that, like
Well,
how
again,
it can heal you. Like this might be the thing. This might be the way to the next version of yourself. Sometimes when we don't know what to do next because we've experienced something insane, talking about it is is the bridge.
oh, 100%. And
Mhm.
especially, I think especially now at this point in our collective human history, right? Where we have just come through a global pandemic.
Yeah.
Not like, okay, this happened to California or this happened to Paris, France, or there was a community that was riled by a murder or a mass shooting or something. This is something that we have that has that has echoed, and the ramifications have been felt in every single human being for the most part across the entire planet, at
Yeah.
least in the free world as we know it, right? Um, I think people are now more than ever looking internally and saying, what is the story that I have to tell? What is the gift that I want to give the world? Because, oh, tomorrow is not guaranteed. That's what it's just taught us. And I think there are a lot of people, I've never taken things like that for granted, but I think that a lot of people, I think we as a culture have through the internet and just the availability of being able to live a pretty decent life in a free society, we have taken certain things for granted. And I think the COVID-19 pandemic has taught a lot of people that may have taken things, and it's not a bad thing. This isn't a read on anyone. I'm guilty of it as well. I think we all are to a certain degree. Um, we took advantage of certain things that we thought, okay, they'll just be here tomorrow. I'll be able to go to a movie theater. I'll be able to do this. I'll be able to see my family. I'll be able to go to work. I'll be able to go to Starbucks and see, Joe that serves me my morning latte every day on my way to work, whatever it is, right? Now we've been forced to look within, especially being quarantined, right? Okay, ooh, this is
Mhm.
what I'm doing. And I think that a lot of people are now starting to, which is wonderful, being able to find their inner voice and then going, okay, you know what? I can do this too. I got a gift I want to share with the world too. And it's what's going to make me happy. And that's really one of the coolest things you can do, in my opinion.
And on that note, be cool.
Be cool. Be cool.
Be cool. Thank you, Collier, so much for being on the show.
You're
This was,
welcome. It's my
yeah,
pleasure.
thank you. This was wonderful. Is there anything else you'd like people to know before we say goodbye?
Um, I would just say if you are interested, please check out A Murder in Mansfield on Investigation Discovery, Discovery Plus. My website is collierlandry.com, COLLIER, landry.com/podcasts. You check out the Moving Past Murder podcast. And on that note, just stay true to you guys. That's all.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks, Christine.
And that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to another episode of Podcast Coaching with Christine. For more information on this week's episode, be sure to check the show notes. You can also find more information on my website, Christine-O'Donnell.com. There's a bunch of resources over there as well, and more information about my community if you would like to join it. Again, that's Christine-O'Donnell.com. If this podcast helped you in any way, please let me know. You can always screenshot that you've listened to this episode and then share it in your stories and tag me on Instagram. I am happy to reshare your story and let more people know about what you're doing, your podcast. Thank you again for listening, and I will see you next time.